everyone, and welcome to the Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns podcast. I'm Rosemary Truman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advancing Innovation, and I'm here to welcome Sedale Turbovsky on the podcast. He's a good friend, a colleague, a serial entrepreneur, and the CEO of Opengrants, and he's going to change your life today. So Sedale, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to talk about grants and whatever else, but yeah, happy to be here.
Yes. I have to tell you something. Every time I've had Sedale speak to our startups, they worship him. They can't wait to have him talk again because he's a fountain of wisdom for sure. So Sedale, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do in your background?
Sure. So right now at Opengrants, we're focused on really transforming the way that entrepreneurs are able to harness government grant funding to drive their innovations forward. So historically, Silicon Valley and a lot of really great innovation, frankly, and some of the most transformative innovation has come out of public-private partnerships where the government, through grant funding and other contracts, supported innovation and really like moved forward the state of science and our understanding of technology and transformed the way we do business. And so at Opengrants, our vision is to bring back that resource as a truly accessible product for founders. So over the last 20 years, through a lot of overregulation and excessive bureaucracy, it's become a bit of a challenge to secure grant funding, especially for founders at early stage companies. And so our focus is transforming that and changing that to make it really turnkey and accessible. I spent about 7 years of my career helping folks strategize around government grant funding. I actually used grants to fund my first startup and really got an inside look at how challenging that can be for a founder. And I was really lucky to have incredible resources around me, including an incredible grant writing company that helped me secure that funding. And I don't think I would have been able to do it without it. And so Opengrants, our mission is really to make founders both aware of the opportunity, but also to give them the resources that they need to be able to secure that money and use it as a first check-in for their innovation.
So Sedale, how do you actually make startups aware of the opportunities? How do you have a database, or what do you use?
Yeah, Opengrants is a platform. It's a SaaS product. You could go opengrants.io. And basically, as a founder, you can create a profile for your company and then get matched to grant funding. So you can sign up. It's free. You create a profile, fill out some information, same as you might do on LinkedIn. And then you will get connected to grant funding. And that's the first thing we do is we aggregate funding from the federal, state, local level. We aggregate funding from foundations. And across the spectrum, a universe of grant funding, we pull it all into one place. There really isn't a repository for funding like this anywhere else. And so we pull that all together and we make it really accessible. And that's the first step we take is, as a founder, there's one place you can go and you can figure out all of the funding that you might be eligible for.
Could you tell them the name of the URL again, just because this is amazing, it's free?
Yeah, it's opengrants.io. So just like it sounds, OPENGRANTS, opengrants.io. And there's a big button right in the middle of the screen that says find a grant or get grant funding, something along those lines. Click on that and you'll be on your way to looking at grant funding that you might be eligible for.
So you mentioned this excessive bureaucracy has become a challenge for organizations that want to get access to the funding. What kind of bureaucracy are you referencing?
There's a lot of things to unpack here, but I think the big offenders that I see, one of the things that always blows my mind is the entrepreneurs and founders in this space. They're curing cancer, they're solving climate change, they're literally working on saving the world, and the government in their infinite wisdom says, hey, fill out like a 40-page research paper and use this like interface that we built in the 70s that doesn't always work and breaks all the time to actually submit the information to us. And maybe you'll get some money, but like in a year. It's just like, it's a lot of excessive process. And then that doesn't even like start to like, so that's the tip of the spear. One of the other big offenders that we see is a huge barrier is for some of these really ambitious projects, they require match funding, which can be really hard to come by, especially if you're, from a disadvantaged community, or you just don't have access to those capital resources. You're not part of that network or that world. So there's a lot of just kind of administrative things that, while it kind of makes sense within the government as they manage their checks and balances and try to optimize what they're doing, it really just doesn't make sense in the public, in the private industry world. And so it's a problem, and we're looking for a lot of different ways to solve that. But first and foremost is simply giving founders the tools they need to navigate the existing system.
Mm-hmm. I know we have found it's challenging to find the matching funding. So how do you solve that problem?
Right now, we haven't solved it. Let's, I'll be honest. The best thing we can do is, with our platform, we do, and we'll be releasing features where organizations can partner more efficiently. So say you're working on, a lab to work on, cancer research. You might be able to reach out and within the platform find some labs that exist, or some high net worth investors who are looking to invest in that kind of space. So you might be able to build partnerships within the platform. But the best thing I can say is that as you look at the expansive universe of funding, and you find an opportunity that requires some match, you just have to start doing that kind of fundraising and that partnership building work as early as possible. And so that's one of the things I think that comes with awareness, at least. It's one of the basic things that we can help with is, hey, if you're aware, at least you can get started on the process. And by the time that grant's due, hopefully you have a couple partners who are willing to put up that match funding.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable piece of advice, is start as early as possible putting together the partners. If you're part of the ecosystem, it's easier if you already know the people, but a lot of times you have to forge brand new relationships.
Yep. Yeah.
So what do you think the best practices are in grant writing? What are some secret formulas?
I think one of the first best practices is that it's not a secret. It's, what is down in the RFP is written, and the amount of times that, we see folks who submit a grant and then just get disqualified, which means that their idea didn't really get considered. They just did something wrong formatting wise. And I think people don't always realize it's the grant has things that are as specific as what the gutter on your pages needs to be formatted for. And they expect you to follow all these rules, and they can kick your ideas out. They say they reserve the right to make a decision, but lots of times they use that as a first means of just kicking ideas out, because unfortunately the reality is that a lot of these programs are highly competitive, and there's a finite amount of resources. So whatever they can do to clear the decks, they will. And so, the first thing I tell people is just read that request for proposal really closely and take careful notes, annotate, go through the whole thing. It's, sometimes 80, 90, hundreds of pages. So it's a little bit of, a slog, but definitely read through that closely and understand the requirements. And then the second thing, if I had to just say two, for example, the second thing I'd say is, apart from understanding the basic requirements, is you need to understand the motivations of the bureaucrats themselves. These folks, these civil servants, they're trying to do good work. And while they don't always have the tools they'd like to have, and they'll even admit that as they talk to you, grants are one of the tools they have. And while it's an imperfect tool, it's what they have. So that's what they're using. And they're trying to advance certain things or accomplish certain things. And your ability to understand what they're trying to accomplish on a very deep level will make you infinitely more able to respond in a really competitive way. So if you just take an RFP on its face value, you might miss some of the nuances of what the agency is trying to accomplish, or what that program is trying to accomplish. So it's really important that you not only understand these folks, but build relationships. Get to know them, get to understand their motivations and what they're looking for in partners. They are civil servants, after all. It's implied in the name. You are a civilian, a stakeholder, and they're there to serve you. So leverage that. Reach out, have meetings, get to know them, and build good relationships. I'd say those are the big best practices. A lot of the rest of it just kind of comes down to execution. But those are the two things that are really going to get you the farthest. Is understanding what's in the RFP itself on a really deep level, and then understanding the motivations behind the folks deploying capital.
And so, Sedale, how do you find out who are the people that you're supposed to talk to? And that's kind of point one. And then point two is, recently we applied for a grant, a large one, and they didn't actually allow you to speak with anyone. So, you have a couple of other barriers, but how do you find out who they are?
Yeah, and this once again comes down to some of the issues that we're trying to solve. For many programs, I'd say that, typically you can find some point of contact who is either listed in the RFP or listed in the program. That's generally speaking, that's the case. But in cases, I highly recommend closely reading the RFP. It's probably in there. You can reach out. There are times though when there's no way to connect with anyone. In those cases, really the only mechanism right now that exists is your network. Unfortunately, you have to reach out, know the people, and you can connect with consultants and other people who might be able to help you navigate that space. That's one of the reasons we highly recommend our users to work with grant writers, in fact, is because a lot of these grant writers maybe worked at the agency before, or they have existing relationships and they can help you navigate that space. And it can be immensely advantageous. The other thing that I would say though is, unfortunately right now, some of these processes are not as open and as, equitable and competitive as they claim to be. And it's not always it's not like there's collusion happening usually. Sometimes it's simply just poorly developed process from the agency. I've spoken regularly with folks at a variety of agencies that I won't mention, who are very frustrated with the grant process the way it is, and they wish it was different. And so I think that, for us to really start to have change here, Opengrants, of course, we're focused on a technology solution, but I think also people need to come to the table and voice their frustration, participate, submit comments. There's a lot of different avenues to participate in a public agency process, and being engaged, I think, is just looking for ways to submit comments, participate in public meetings, offer insights. Reaching out, typically it helps. Just figure out what the agency is and reach out to them generally, and figure out who you're supposed to talk with. Do a little legwork, and they're always in my experience, everyone's been very receptive. Doesn't mean anything really changes sometimes, but you can at least identify people who you're supposed to be talking with.
Have you ever seen the situation where there's a grant written a certain way, and they say they're going to give one grant out, and at the end of the day, they change their minds? I mean, has that ever happened from what you've seen?
Yeah, and I mean, I've personally participated in that happening before as well. There are opportunities if you feel like there's been a miscarriage of justice, so to speak. There's opportunities to sort of work with public advisors and other resources within an agency. I mean, I've seen agencies change their mind and realize that they've made a mistake. It doesn't happen very often, but I think on the whole, a lot of this does, once again, it boils down to not so much of collusion or willful desire to do things the wrong way, but simply that it's just a bad process, right? There's a really intense culture of incumbency. There's an incentive within the agencies and bureaucracy themselves to not do anything new ever. If they just keep doing the same thing, they'll still have their jobs and keep making money. If they do new things, they can get in trouble. And so it's a really they're put in a really uncomfortable position. And I feel for our civil servants that have to work within that framework. I think it's a really difficult position to be in. So, one of the things that I always encourage folks to do, as I mentioned earlier, is build relationships and empathize, so that you can help them work through the bad process together. Frequently they can tell you what's kind of not functioning well or broken, and maybe you can help them with that, and that can be a really valuable addition to, in support of your case, so to speak.
You're mentioning about equality, and lots of times there's incumbents for a grant, and the incumbent always gets it. How do you shatter that? Or is it just back to the relationship?
I think part of it's back to the relationship. I think there's also, there's also opportunities to really help these folks understand that there's better ways to do things and that there's more efficient ways to break into these spaces. Sometimes there's a good reason for an incumbent to continue to get funding, and that's also a reality. But there's certainly many cases where that's not the case, and it's just a function that's happening. And I think a lot of that, like I said, it's transparency. Sometimes incumbents just keep getting a grant because they're the only ones who show up. And so transparency, I think, is the first step, where let's start getting more opportunities on the table for grants to go to other people, for more people to be involved in the process. Really when you look at the economy as a whole, the group of people doing business with the government is really fairly small compared to the opportunity, right? So you think a $4 trillion market opportunity, and you go on USA Spending, and 95%, well, I'll just say that there's more, there's the people who are at the table are going to keep getting opportunities and capital unless we get a lot more people to the table to participate. And that's what we need to do.
So let's say you don't get the grant. What do you do?
Grants are, I love grants, especially for startups, because they're a forcing function that requires you to get really clear on your go-to-market and get really clear on your technology and your pitch, and organize your finances and define a lot of things about your company. If you're not successful, the first thing you should do is say, well, why weren't we successful? You can ask the agency. Sometimes there's opportunities for a lot of programs. There's opportunities for a debrief where they'll at least submit some detailed written notes to you about why they passed on the opportunity. For many agencies, you can even sit down with the team and discuss why it wasn't successful. And the same goes, for some foundations as well. But I think above and beyond getting that debrief and re-engaging, you can resubmit. SBIR is a classic one where people will submit 3 or 4 times sometimes before they get a successful SBIR award. That's, sometimes it's a function of just there's a finite amount of money and a lot of people who are interested. But I think, above and beyond the logistics of grant applications, that piece of writing that you've put together, that can be the basis for your business plan. That can be a basis for a lot of things, including fundraising, frankly. And so you should definitely memorialize that, keep it, and use it for other things. You can also, if you go off to submit other grants, you can typically reuse a lot of things that you've developed for an initial application in other subsequent applications. So there's a lot of value of a grant application above and beyond the capital. Of course, top of mind for everyone is the money, but there's other ways you can utilize that, and it's a really good strategic exercise, especially I feel for early stage companies who may not have things sophisticated approaches to calculating indirect costs or other things that you need if you're going to do business with the government.
Speaking of the budget and indirect costs, so yeah. If you're not familiar with how to do those calculations or prepare your budget properly, you haven't done it before, what kind of resources would you recommend?
I always say, especially for founders, just go find an expert who can do it and hire them. There are, there's lengthy guides published by the government around how to do all this stuff. I'll just use SBIR as an example. The NSF SBIR program has a manual. I think it's hundreds of pages, and it covers everything you need to know: compliance reporting, how to submit the application, what should be in each thing. And just as an aside, I encourage you all to check out Opengrants. We have a program that we're launching in the next few days. So if you go to the website or sign up, we recently partnered with some groups, and we'll be publishing a bunch of templates of all this stuff. And that's the other thing I was going to note is like just Google around. A lot of this stuff is open source. And so if you Google like SBIR budget template, the first results you're going to get back are all federal resources for how to do an SBIR budget, how to put that together. So there's a lot of resources, grants, especially public, like if you're going after government grants. A lot of this stuff is published on the website for the agency. You can download templates, you can download guidance, and you can spend all your time reading it and get all up to speed. So that's for the DIY folks. For the founders who are like me, who are like, oh, I shouldn't do this, and other experts should. And right, like I get that, like, you know, you have to be in a position where you can either pay these people or incentivize them to do work for you for free. But if you can go get an expert to do it, I mean, they're just going to go so much faster, and it's going to be right the first time. So just hire a grant writer, hire a CPA who knows what they're doing when it comes to accounting for grants. Like, just go get some experts. And you know, Opengrants has sourced a lot of those experts. You can find them online. Generally speaking, you can reach out to you know, folks you work with and ask around. There's a lot of resources. I would say first, if you can afford it, or if you can. If you can swing it one way or another, get an expert to do it for you.
And so, just to make sure the people who are listening understand, you all have a source, some experts that can help.
Yes. So Opengrants, in addition to being able to create a profile, get connected to grant funding, as soon as you've done that process, you can actually reach out on our marketplace, and you can hire experts who will help you with that process. So what Opengrants does is we actually vet, interview, and then onboard experts into our platform who are, you know, experienced in not only grant writing and consulting in the grant space, but they have deep relationships and knowledge of these programs. So we recruit out of the State Department, we recruit out of NSF, DOD, we recruit out of like the big consulting firms as well. And these folks sign up on our platform typically as freelancers. And that's what they do. That's their whole, like, that's their gig, is working in grants. So it's the thing they do full time, and it's probably not the thing you do full time as a founder. So go get an expert and work with them. It's just better. You get where you need to go.
Do you recommend that people ever respond to an RFI?
Yes, that's a great way. So that's one of those ways that you can engage with the agency ahead of time, and you can engage and build relationships. Not only do I recommend you respond to RFI, but like if you want to get real nerdy about it, you can like subscribe to the Federal Register and make sure that you're submitting comments when agencies solicit comments about rulemaking and legislation. You know, my personal opinion is that, you know, once again, get to the table, like be involved with government, both state, federal, and local, you know, have an impact there and build relationships, because there's a lot of opportunity in government. And while it has its failings and faults, it's an incredible place to be as a tech company. It's trying to shape the future and build things. They have a ton of risk capital, and they like to deploy it. So I'd say be at the table, be in the conversation, build a profile so they know you're responsible, that you're engaged, and they feel good about giving you money.
Great suggestions. So do you think that the grant process will change? You know, given there's a transparency around the knowledge that the process isn't great, there's a lot of bureaucracy. Do you see things changing?
I do. You know, I think that within government, I've seen recently, especially, a willingness to do some things that are new. And you know, I hope I don't come off as naive here. If you speak to me at length, I'll get on my soapbox, and you'll find that I'm rather jaded about generally things changing in government. But I think that I really do think that this is a really exciting time, because what's happened with the pandemic is it's really exposed a lot of cracks in the infrastructure in terms of what government can do and how it can deliver services. And there's plenty of really interesting and compelling examples of how government has drifted into dangerous levels of irrelevancy, where it's like, you know, hey, we pay taxes, the government's supposed to provide a service, we have all these civil servants who are doing things, and they just no longer have the capability to do what they need to do. and it's a real problem. And so, as different folks in GovTech like work to empower these folks, and I really believe that government will play continues to play an important role, but I think that they really need to like have a deep like look at themselves and figure out how they kind of come to the table in terms of innovation and adoption of new technology, adoption of better processes, and some real change in how they approach things, because you can only keep collecting taxes and not delivering services for so long.
That's a great way of saying it. I have to tell you something. It's been very interesting for me over the years applying for grants. I've applied for grants where there's an incumbent. I tried really hard to make it clear why we were differentiated against the incumbent. But as you said, maybe there was a reason the incumbent was staying. We've had the situation where we can't talk to anyone because they don't allow it. We had a really interesting situation recently applying to a grant at the EDA where, and I'll give a shout out to Alma Plummer and Vanessa Lowe, who are the two people that worked with us on this grant. But we had 6 conversations with them, which was, to me, quite unusual. I've never been able to have a conversation usually with the person with the people who are providing the grant. So it's really very different from what you had mentioned, building the relationships. I think you're definitely spot on with the RFI and getting in conversation. But so I noticed that as a change. And also for the budget, we created a template because there was not one provided. And they actually went in and added lines that they wanted to see, which was, again, incredibly helpful. I didn't expect it. So I see things changing as well. So you get the grant. Now what? Do you continue to engage with the program officers, or what do you do?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and to bring my comments from like this sort of like high level critique of government to like the hardworking civil servants who are like amazing. So institutionally, I think there's some deep flaws, deep issues, but down at like the human level, the people who are working with you, they, like I said, they are like, they're trying to do good things. They're trying to like make a difference. And they're like, they're using tools that even they are aware of the flaws, and they want to make things work with you. And so, yeah, definitely, you want to be a great partner. You want to like, keep them updated. It's like having an investor, right? Like you're sending investor updates to your program officer, you're working with them. And frankly, what I've found is even if things go way off the rails and there's big problems, if you've built a good relationship, they're going to work with you to make sure that relationship continues, and they're going to try to help you get the project back on track and keep things moving forward, because it's in everyone's best interest that these things work, that these relationships yield good outcomes. And at the end of the day, that's their job, is to try to make those things happen. So if you're upfront and honest with them, definitely like these cases where there's like outright fraud and other things, just like, all right, well, that's why. But most of the time, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and things go wrong, they're happy to help, right? Like everyone understands that, like, it's human beings doing things. We're human beings. We're trying to accomplish something, and they're not your enemy. They're not like someone to be avoided. They're a partner, and they should be recognized as such. And that goes for, typically, you may have to ask permission, but like saying, hey, we're working with the EDA on a project, that's a cool thing, like, right? Like I want to be associated with that. I want to be associated with a cool project with a federal agency. Like that's awesome. I want to build something neat, and everyone wants to like be recognized for the good work they do. So think of them as like a partner and embrace them as such. And typically what we've seen is you'll be treated really well, and everyone's trying to, generally speaking, what we've seen is that everyone's trying to do good work and accomplish really cool things. And while there's like a lot of disagreement sometimes about really how that should happen, at the end of the day, when you're breaking down your relationship with an agency, you should be working closely with that person who's managing the program.
It's very interesting, Sedale. We applied for this large grant recently, and we're really excited about. We haven't heard back yet, but I was going through my computer and identifying all of the partnership agreements we have across the federal government. It's 27, I think. I think it was either 24 or 27, one of those two. But it just shows all these years of working on these relationships that really matter when you. And I was actually thinking about who's our competition and how many agreements will they have. So I totally agree with you. So just another question. So speaking of EDA, Build to Scale is out. Venture, I think it's called, is out. Venture capital. And they require letters of support. Is there any magic on letters of support? For example, we were going through our list of letters that we need, and we're basically picking one out of each category. So not to boil the ocean, but to have like 9 or 10. Is there any guidance you have around the letters of support?
Only to start super early, because it takes people forever. I'd say, the best practices there just really do involve like, hey, understand who you need to get letters from and start early. I think there's really specific guidance for, different programs and like specific grant programs. But generally speaking, like a letter of support is something that you're going to need to get for different projects, and you're going to want to start really early because people have a lot of priorities. They have a lot of things to take care of. Once again, it really boils down to like, are you managing your human relationships really well? And while I don't know that the like letters of support and all this stuff are generally like great indicators of success or anything else, I think, this is about what I'm saying now is just about navigating the current system as it exists. And really getting a letter of support is build a relationship with that group and reach out early because they have things to do and maybe they need board approval to get a letter. So you want to make sure you're getting those started as soon as possible, because they can take quite a while, especially if an organization needs to get board approval for a letter or something like that. You want to get started as soon as possible.
Well, good suggestion. So are there any last items you want to mention to the entrepreneurs that are listening in?
I would love to close with two things. One, and I've repeated this too much, but I really just encourage entrepreneurs to come, participate. The government is a great resource. It's traditionally been an incredible partner for innovation. And I encourage you to reach out and connect not only with local and state and federal like civil servants and the agencies that are relevant to the work that you're doing, to understand one, maybe like any compliance issues around what you're building, but also two, to really seed the ground. If you're doing important work, for example, in energy, the Department of Energy is a great partner to have. They have access to national labs, they have access to infrastructure you might not know about. I think sometimes entrepreneurs aren't aware that the United States has a rich ecosystem of laboratories. We have an incredible ecosystem of manufacturing institutes as well. There are incredible amounts of government resources available to you for free frequently. The SBDCs exists. There's, you can get consulting, you can get help with your fundraise, you can get help designing your pitch deck, and it's all federally funded activities that don't cost you anything as an entrepreneur. So especially as like a bootstrapping entrepreneur, I encourage you to just get familiar with the resources that are available to you, participate, get on the radar of these groups and these agencies so that as you reach out for funding, they are ready to work with you. And then I'll just make the invitation, if you want to do that really efficiently, go to Opengrants. I guess like the two places you could start is Google or Opengrants. And, one of them is going to be quick and really efficient and it's free. And the other one might take you a little bit longer. Either way, selfishly, of course, I'd say check out Opengrants first. But yeah, definitely like regardless of what you do, get involved. We need more entrepreneurs and innovators at the table building things and making change, and less of incumbencies, just collecting money and not really doing much.
So can you just, for the audience, describe what is SBDCs?
So real quickly, SBDCs are small business development centers, and they're really cool. They exist across the United States, and they exist for the sole purpose of helping small business owners build businesses and be successful. They have departments like the Procurement Technical Assistance Center that will literally help you for free go get government contracts and build your business. Like, they're awesome. They're super cool. And people don't know they exist. I think it's a tragedy. And so just shameless plug, Opengrants recently partnered with the NorCal SBDC and the Granite City Accelerator, which is actually the recording booth that I'm in right now. It's a great opportunity because users on our platform can now not only get access to office hours and the services we provide, but they can also access deeper services, consulting, business deck, business strategy, fundraising support, all of these things. And it's free. Like, it's paid for by the federal government. Your tax dollars already are gone. Like, you might as well use it, right? So before you go out and hire some like $20,000, engagement to like get your deck designed, hit up the SBDC and see what they have to offer. They can be really helpful.
All right, well, Sedale, I'm just going to try to summarize. I have a lot of summarization points here that are value to take away. Read the RFP, make sure that you get the formatting right, build relationships, empathize with these human beings, reuse what you've developed for other applications. You can use it for your business plans, et cetera, et cetera. Google is a good friend and Opengrants is a better one. But you can get templates and watch out for the templates that are coming online at Opengrants. Everybody here is listening right now should be signing up for Opengrants if you haven't already. From an RFI standpoint, the RFI allows you to engage with the agency ahead of time and subscribe to the Federal Register so you can actually be part of the conversation, be at the table, build a profile. If you get the grant, keep the program manager officer updated who worked with you, and that'll even help you if you run into a little bit of trouble. Start early on the letters of support, manage your relationships, remember that they're human beings, I've said that a few times. Participate. Identify those agencies that are relevant to you and start building relationships with them early. There's a lot of free stuff. The SBDCs have free things. You can have access to national labs, infrastructure, manufacturing. And with that, go to opengrants.co, right? .io.
Yeah.
Opengrants.io. Great, perfect. So thank you very much for everybody for listening today. And thank you, Sedale, for imparting your wisdom. I really am grateful.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. It was great.